Welcome everyone. My name is Mary Collins and I'm Director of the British Columbia Healthy Living Alliance. We are so pleased that you are joining us today, and we have already, I think, over 100 people online and expecting more to come. So obviously this is a very important topic for everyone. We are here today to discuss food insecurity, including what the data tells us about who in British Columbia is food insecure, what are some of the policy options we need to consider, and promising community practices to build resilience. We have an interesting program lined up for you, which I'll tell you about shortly, but just before we get rolling, I'd like to go over a few housekeeping items. First of all, if you're having trouble hearing me, try turning up the volume on your phone or computer. And of course, we really want your input today, so we will be asking you to use the control panel on the right-hand corner of your screen. Type in your questions for our speakers as you think of them, and we'll have a question period after each speaker and a final round at the end of the 3 presentations. We also want you to participate in some polls. We'll give you a heads up that the poll is coming, and you'll see a blue screen that has multiple choice questions. Please respond to the polls. You'll have a few seconds to do so, and then we'll publish the results so everyone can see. The poll provides us, our panelists, and you with instant feedback. Again, we really want to hear your questions and comments, and you can submit them at any time during the presentation by simply typing them in the question box on the right-hand side of your screen. And also, please indicate if there's someone in particular you're addressing your question to, and we'll answer as many questions as we have time for, but if we miss any of them, we'll send out in a post-event email with missing questions and answers, and we're also recording this, and it will be online on our website later as well. So let me tell you about our program today. Affordable, healthy food is essential to a healthy life. We know that people living on low incomes have a much higher risk of developing chronic disease and experiencing poor health overall. And a big part of this is related to diet and food quality. Healthy food is often sacrificed when income is low because the food budget is variable and flexible, unlike other fixed costs such as rent and utilities. And of course, food insecurity creates toxic levels of stress. So our first speaker, Melanie Currine, will provide some context to the issue by sharing the findings of a recent research project that explored the characteristics and health implications of food insecure households in British Columbia using the Canadian Community Health Survey data. Our second speaker, Jerry Caston, will discuss policy options from the new Dietitians of Canada position paper on individual and household food insecurity that was released earlier this year. And our final speaker, Jamie Kumar, will speak about the First Nations Food Systems Program, highlighting what's happening on the ground in First Nations communities, emphasizing what can be done to strengthen capacity and resilience at a community level. So that's an overview of the webinar, but before our first speaker gets started, we'd like to start with a question about you. We'll put up this poll and post the results. If you see that you fit into more than one category, just choose the one that's the best fit of why you're joining us today. The poll is open. Which of these statements best describes your interest in the topic of today's webinar? Give us an answer. Waiting for a little bit more. And well, we obviously have a lot of dietitians. We have 33% dietitians, and then 24% who work in a services or a program. So quite a variety of folks too that have answered. Thank you all for answering it. And just one other question, just to get a sense of your thoughts on this topic. And the poll is, what do you think is the #1 barrier to food security? Oh, it's obvious that, yep, by far the majority think income affordability is the key barrier to food insecurity. Well, thank you very much. That gives us some context here. And so let's proceed. And it's my pleasure to introduce our first speaker, Melanie Currine, who's very knowledgeable about this topic. Melanie is the lead for food security for the BC Centre for Disease Control at the Provincial Health Services Authority. As a provincial manager of food security, Melanie works closely with the regional health authorities, the First Nations Health Authority, and the Ministry of Health to facilitate collaboration and coordination of food security activities. Welcome, Melanie. Thank you for joining us, and please go ahead.
Great. Thanks so much, Mary. It's great to be here today. So as Mary said, I'm the Provincial Manager of Food Security with the Population and Public Health team here at the BC Centre for Disease Control at PHSA. And my role really spans a continuum of food security activities. But as Mary mentioned today, I'm going to focus just on food insecurity. So next slide, please. Before we get started, I'm going to get you to do a short poll. Similar questions to the last one that was asked, but a little bit different. And I'm going to address the answers to the poll at the end. So if you can fill out the poll, and while you're doing that, I'm just going to give a quick overview of what I'm going to talk about today. So I'm going to start by defining food insecurity just to make sure we're all on the same page. Then I'll give a bit of background and context, the research that we did on food insecurity and the report that I'm going to be talking about. And I'll move on to who is the most food insecure in BC, talk shortly about the health impacts, which Mary did mention in our introductions, and then a quick overview of some solutions, but I think Jerry will get more into the solutions. So, okay, so let's see, we've got our answers there. It looks like 43% thought household income and 49% all of the above. So I'm just going to take note of that, and I will get to those at the end. Okay, so I've already gone over the overview. So let's move into the next slide, please. So defining food insecurity. So food insecurity, household food insecurity, is when a household worries about or lacks the financial means to buy healthy, safe, personally acceptable food. So this is a definition that I created a bit in conjunction with my population and public health team here at PHSA, and it's adapted from the definition of Health Canada and from Proof. And I'm going to talk a little bit more about Proof for people who don't know about it later in my presentation. So when I'm talking about household or individual food insecurity, I'm really talking about not having enough money to buy the food you want and need, which from the poll question that Mary put up was, you know, it shows that all of you see that as the major barrier to food insecurity. So, you know, I often say, you know, talking about and teaching people how to budget or how to cook is not going to solve their food insecure situation. And just from a personal anecdote, I know some of you on the call have done the Welfare Food Challenge, but I did it a couple of years ago, where you have to spend a week living on what you would receive as income if you're on income assistance. And I would say I'm a really good budgeter, and I'm a pretty darn good cook, and I still had to eat highly processed, low nutrient food to be able to eat on the amount of money that you would get on social assistance. Doing it with my husband added a lot more complications because we had different food preferences, and he had different caloric needs. But it was actually a really good experience if you haven't done it before. Good in that it gives you a really good idea of how hard it is to live on a small amount of money and to try to eat well. The graph on the right is the different levels of food insecurity. So severely, moderate, and marginally food insecure. And Health Canada, the CCHS data, which I'll talk about later, normally talked about severe and moderate food insecurity. But we know that researchers are saying we also have to look at marginal food insecurity, and so that is included in all of our stats as we move forward. So next slide, please. So just to give you a bit of background into this work, the research report is the one on the left. And in the fall of 2015, the Population Public Health team, my team, partnered with the University of Toronto and Proof. And for those of you who don't know Proof, it's sort of out of the University of Toronto, but it's a group of researchers across Canada who are working on policy solutions to food insecurity. And I'll give you their website later in the presentation. And the goal was to take a more in-depth look at food insecurity in BC. So before getting into the findings, I want to first set the context as to why food insecurity is a priority for me and my team here at PHSA. In relation to health, Mary already mentioned this in the introduction if you missed it. We know that food insecurity negatively impacts physical, mental, and social well-being, and it increases costs to our healthcare system. This work also really aligns well with some work that we're already doing in the Population Public Health Program at PHSA. So on the right, you can see the food costing report. If you don't know about that, I will give the website at the end. But we do this every 2 years, and PHSA coordinates it, and the regional health authorities collect all the data to really try and get an idea of the average cost of an adequately healthy diet, so we know what it costs for people to eat well. And the goal of this work is really to raise awareness about the challenges for low-income people to eat healthy. So the project that we did, you can see it, the title of that report on the left is Priority Health Equity Indicators, and that's because at PHSA and as part of a provincial initiative, there are 52 health equity indicators, and food insecurity is one of them. And of course, at the provincial level, food insecurity is part of the broader food security core program paper. Next slide, please. And seeing as there's a lot of dietitians on the call, and I'm a dietitian myself, healthy eating is really key, and it's a provincial priority to increase fruit and vegetable consumption and work on healthy eating. And so for those of you, some of you may have seen this, for those of you who haven't, this is a bit of a pyramid that I would call her kind of one of our gurus in healthy eating, Ellen Satter, developed, saying that to be a competent eater, so to have a good relationship with food, to eat well, you need each of the levels of in place to be able to get to be a competent eater. It's like Maslow's hierarchy of needs. And so I changed our pyramid slightly for this presentation, but you can see that the bottom three that I've highlighted in green are all that people have to be food secure. They cannot be food insecure to be able to eat well. So we can't expect people to eat well if they don't have sort of foundation of healthy eating, which is having that economic access to healthy food for the most part. Next slide, please. So getting into the findings of our study. So I'm just going to review that. We did do this work in partnership with Dr. Val Tarasuk, some of you may know her, and her team at the University of Toronto with Proof. And we analyzed the Canadian Community Health Survey data from 2005 to 2012. Sorry, I feel like there might be a little bit of feedback here. Maybe I'm just excited and breathing heavy. But, and what we found were close to 500,000 British Columbians experienced some level of food insecurity from 2011 to 2012. This is more than 1 in 10 households. And the prevalence has gradually increased over time from the time period that we looked at. Unfortunately, we don't have 2013-14 data because BC, for some reason, opted out of participating in that year of surveillance. The highest rates of food insecurity you can see were in the north in the map that I've got there at 16%. And then when we look at children, about 1 in 6 BC children under the age of 18 live in households experiencing some level of food insecurity. But this was as high as 1 in 5 and 1 in 4 in some of the health authorities in our province. Next slide, please. So if we continue to look at households with children, we know that households with children have higher rates of food insecurity than those without. On the graph, you can see that female lone parent-led households with children under 18 years of age had the highest rate of food insecurity among the household types analyzed. It was 5 times higher than couples with no kids. Next slide, please. When we look at all of the households that are food insecure, of all the households, people are often surprised to see that the majority are working. You can see that 65% of food insecure households are employed. There tends to be a presumption that the majority are on social assistance. So if we look at the next slide and do look at social assistance rates, what we see is that although they are not the majority of the people who are food insecure in our province, those people who are, those households who are on social assistance, about 3/4 or 76% of those households are food insecure. So the majority of people on social assistance in our province are food insecure. Next slide, please. So that was just some of the findings. You can get all of those findings in the report, and I'll share the website at the end. But just to get more into the impact of food insecurity, we've talked overall about general health, but the graphs that's in the slide are from the health indicators that were looked at by CCHS data. And you can see that for overall health, mental health, anxiety and mood, obesity, everything is worse for food insecure families. We also know from the research that adults who are food insecure increase risk for chronic conditions, and they also have a harder time managing those conditions. There's an increased likelihood of depression, distress, and social isolation. And we did talk about children, and children also, even though parents often will try and protect their kids from food insecurity, we know that there are a number of children who live in food insecure households, and they're at greater risk for micronutrient deficiencies. They have poorer academic outcomes, increased risk of chronic conditions, including depression. Some work that was done in Ontario also shows that adults living in food insecure households have higher utilization and total health care costs than people who are food secure. And these costs range from 23% for those people who are marginally food insecure to 121 times higher for those who are severely food insecure. So coming to the end of my presentation, so I can hand it on, if we move to the next slide, I'm going to talk a little bit about our poll and the solutions. So the best way to reduce household food insecurity at a population level is by A. 43% of you said A and 49% of you said D, which is all of the above. So we really do need to look at policy interventions. And what I'd like to say is that while community programs have a number of benefits, they may increase capacity and confidence, decrease social isolation, or they might create a more local and resilient food system. Next slide. These are, using the words of Collins, Power, and Little, these are food-based solutions for income-based problems. And we need income solutions to really address the root cause of food insecurity, which is poverty. So what do we need to do to ensure that people have the money to buy the food they want or need? I'm going to let Jerry talk about some other policy work that's been happening from Dietitians Canada. But some work that I want to share with you is, next slide, is one study that just came out in 2016 by Dr. Val Terasek and her team, who worked with us on the project. And they looked at some social policies in BC, and they did find a decrease in food insecurity when there was an increase in social assistance rates. However, this improvement didn't last, and you can read the article to find out a bit more and to look at the other policy interventions they looked at. Next slide. Some of you may have been hearing about the guaranteed annual income or basic income guarantee. It's getting quite a bit of press and a lot of attention from research, and there's a number of recent articles that have been published on this. And Ontario is actually looking at piloting this strategy. And then finally, I just want to let you know that Proof is doing some work on this. And next slide, thank you. And you can find a number of different research articles, as well as this fact sheet that I put up here around some policy and food insecurity. Now, I can't see the website on the slide, but hopefully you can. And if not, it is just proof.utoronto.ca, or if you just Google proof insecurity, it will come up. And so the final slide, I just want to go over quickly the resources that I reviewed today. So on the far left, you have the research report. That's the full report with all of the indicators that we looked at for food insecurity in BC. In the middle, we have some infographics that we developed for each of the health authorities and for BC. And the images you saw me use are from these infographics, and they're specific to the health authorities. So you can download those from our website, and then of course the food costing. So you can either get that from the PHSA website on their population health, or for that and more information on food security, we also run the BC Food Security Gateway website. If you haven't been there, it's a great site to learn more about what's happening in our province and to get resources. So I'll leave it there, and there's my name, so I'll pass it over to Mary. Thank you.
Great. Well, thank you so much, Melanie. That was a great presentation. And however, it's really disheartening to see the highest rates of food insecurity among families with children. It's something we absolutely need to address to ensure that every child in British Columbia has a fair chance of living a healthy life, and that's a big issue for us here at the BC Healthy Living Alliance. Now I'd like to invite our audience to send us questions for Melanie. We have one from Brenda. Melanie, is the CCHS food insecurity data drilled down to the community level or just at the health authority level?
Yeah, that's a great question. Even getting health authority level data, you'll see in our report, we do say that you need to interpret some of the data with caution. Unfortunately, well, we get a lot of numbers for the province, and for some of the health authorities, getting it to the community level, they're saying that the data just, there's not enough people. It's not statistically significant to be able to incorporate into research findings.
Yeah, and then another one, what has the response been to the report to date, and are there plans for getting this information out more generally, more broadly?
That's a great question, and the response, we haven't received a lot of response provincially. There was some media take-up from it with Dr. Val Tarasak. She was the spokesperson for the report. And so I think this and continuing to raise awareness of it is an important aspect, and I think we do depend on our partners like yourselves and other nonprofit organizations working in this area to help raise the issues and raise the profile of food insecurity in our province.
And then Deirdre asked, will the My Health, My Community survey be repeated?
So the My Health, My Community survey is not one that we did here at PHSA. I know there's some work happening around it to look at expanding it to the whole province, if I'm not mistaken. But that was, I think, a VCH and Fraser Health initiative. But I don't feel I have the expertise to be able to speak to it. But it's not part of the CCHS data collection. It's a separate tool, is my understanding.
I think we've got time for two more. First of all, were seniors included in this data?
Yes, seniors were included in the data, and that would be in our full report. The seniors would be in the full report.
Folks can go to that. And then Randy has asked whether, as a nurse, I'm faced regularly with barriers to care for families who live with food insecurity. When there are limited or lack of services for families, there are ethical dilemmas for practitioners. Can you share your thoughts on this?
That is a great question, and I feel like I should maybe wait for Jerry's, because I'm not sure, I haven't seen Jerry's presentation, but I'm not sure, coming from Dietitians of Canada, if he'll actually be touching on that. So I wonder if we could hold that question till and see if that comes up either for Jerry to answer, or maybe Jerry and I can answer it together at the very end.
Okay, good. And I think we're going to move on to Jerry's. There's a couple more questions here. We'll try to get to them later on. If not, we'll certainly get back to them following. But I would like to introduce Jerry Caston. And Jerry is a dietitian and has worked in public health in British Columbia for the past 26 years. He has led the board of directors of both Dietitians of Canada and the BC Agriculture in the Classroom Foundation, and is also an adjunct professor in UBC's dietetics program. So he's got a great foundation to tell us about policy options. Thank you for joining us, Jerry, and please go ahead.
Thank you. And so I will be speaking about the Dietitians of Canada position paper on individual and household food insecurity. Many of the words that you'll hear from me today are simply me reading directly from the paper. That I think things have been really well put. I'm very, very proud of this paper. I think we have a poll for you at this point. And so just some questions about people's thoughts. I think you'll find that this question is iterative of the one that Melanie asked. And while you folks are completing the poll, I'd just like to talk briefly about the authorship of the paper. That the primary author for all of these papers was Elaine Power. And there was also an advisory committee of almost 20 people from all across Canada writing and providing input on this feedback, including people from the Aboriginal Nutrition Network of Dietitians of Canada and the Nutrition and Food Security Network of Dietitians of Canada. And then there was also a variety of individuals which spoke directly to food insecurity amongst Indigenous peoples, including some of our local BC dietitians working in First Nations community group. So I'll go through the papers themselves initially. So I can see that I'm perhaps preaching to the choir today, that people do really seem to understand that the challenge is not about food skills or about access to food, but rather that people simply do not have the financial resources in order to be able to access food. And so we'll return to my slideshow. There we go. So next slide, please.
Oh, we seem to be stuck here, so why don't you continue to go ahead, Jerry?
Yep. So the paper comes in several parts, and I'll be going through how to access the paper at the end of my presentation. So the key resource is this background paper. So the background paper, I like to point out, is 55 pages long, and it runs from page 1 to page 33 with the text of the paper, with the remaining 22 pages being references. So this is an extensively researched and referenced paper. This background paper is extremely detailed, and as you might imagine, with 30 pages of references, it's very, very closely referenced. So if people are looking for the evidence background for all of the food insecurity information, they'll find it in this background paper. Next slide. And then we have the position statement and recommendations from Dietitians of Canada. And again, this is a fairly thorough paper that specifically, so much of it is lifted from the background paper, and it's the supportive evidence for the position and recommendations that Dietitians of Canada is making. Next slide, please. And then we have the executive summary, which is what I'd recommend people start with, because the executive summary is very accessible, it's short, it's very to the point, and it includes the recommendations that Dietitians of Canada has made in association with the position statement. So this is a great place to start, although I would encourage you to download the background paper and the full position statement as well. Next slide, please. And for people who have no time at all, we have a one-page handout that's a lovely representation of all of the positions that are offered in the paper. And this is quite an attractive resource and is quite thorough, and it's a great, if you want an elevator speech about food insecurity, this will help provide that. So what I'd like to do is spend a bit of time talking about household food insecurity. Now, some of this is iterative of what Melanie has spoken about, the fact that households experience food insecurity when there's not enough money for adequate, secure access to food after paying for rent, utilities, and other basic expenses. And that the largest proportion of households who are living with food insecurity are households with low wages or salaries or self-employed, and this includes people in part-time work and in precarious employment. Now, one of the reasons that that's so foundational is that the experience of food insecurity within one's household at some time in the past year is likely a more accurate and sensitive indicator of inadequate financial resources than typical indicators of poverty based on annual average income. So asking people about food insecurity is a great way of assessing their ability to deal in the financial marketplace. So as has been extensively that Melanie went through, the key issue is inadequate income. We also know that people living in food insecure households have more health problems and use more healthcare services. Right? The experience of household food insecurity is associated with a greater likelihood of having one or more chronic physical and or mental health conditions and becoming a high-cost user. So people living in food insecure households are about 1.5 times more likely to be a high-cost user. So, oh, and here we are. Next slide, please. Yes, this is the one. No, sorry, that's right. So this shows the prevalence of chronic conditions amongst Canadian adults 18 to 64 by their food insecurity status. So you can see that a lot of people have associations between their food secure status and their chronic health conditions, and that as food insecurity increases, so do all nature of chronic health conditions. And you can see some key conditions like heart disease looks to be more than double in food insecure households, particularly the severely food insecure. We have higher rates of diabetes, higher rates of back problems and arthritis, higher rates of asthma. So we have significantly higher incidence when people are living with food insecurity. Next slide, please. This slide is again taken from Val Tarasek and her collaborators and shows the average healthcare costs. Although this is Ontario data, I feel confident that we can make the same associations here in British Columbia. And you can see that severely food insecure people are much higher cost health users than people who are living with food security. And so as food insecurity increases, that the cost of healthcare or the cost of healthcare usage also increases. So let's see, where am I? Sorry, lost my page. So really, the key point here is that the cost of not addressing household food insecurity is high, that the total healthcare costs of working age adults has shown to be greater with the greater severity of food insecurity. So for marginal food insecurity, there's a 23% increased cost. For moderate food insecurity, a 49% increased cost, and for severe food insecurity, a 121% higher healthcare costs. Next slide, please. What this shows is, from here in British Columbia, the comparison of income minus the shelter allowance to comparison to the cost of purchasing a nutritionally adequate diet in BC. So as Melanie showed you, we do regular food costing here in British Columbia, and we know the cost of food. For a family of 4 living on a median income, for a family of 4, you can see that the food cost is approaching the complete amount of their non-shelter income. And as we look at an employable couple living on low earned wages, that their food costs exceed their non-shelter income. And this is quite common amongst all the other groups, single male employables and people living on provincial assistance. So consistently we see that the cost of healthy food exceeds the cost of non-shelter income. And this is, of course, worsened by the fact that shelter costs are so high throughout British Columbia, but particularly in the Lower Mainland. So one of the things we know is that food-based programs can provide many benefits to communities, but they're not a solution to food insecurity experienced in a household. Only about 1 in 4 or 5, so about about a fifth to a quarter of food insecure households access and receive some food from places like food banks, soup kitchens, or other food-based relief programs. So we know that charitable food programs are doing really effective work, and they're really helping people to get food. However, they're not reaching the vast majority of people who are living with food insecurity. We also know that community-based food initiatives, so things like community gardens, cooking programs, and good food boxes provide a variety of benefits to both individual participants and local food systems. Things like community gardens can improve mental health, and cooking programs increase social connectedness. And good food boxes certainly connect people with agriculture. So we know that there are health benefits from all of these programs, and yet we also know that relatively few individuals from food insecure households participate in such programs. Inadequate or insecure access to food is very stressful for households, and the management of households' expenses becomes a daily challenge. So what we need is systemic policy responses that ensure sufficient and consistent income for all households. This is the way to address household food insecurity in Canada. That government policies can promote income security through basic income guarantees, through employment policies, through income transfers and tax subsidies, through exemptions and tax credits. Social assistance and disability rates must also provide sufficient income to pay for basic needs, including not only food, but the extra costs of specially prescribed diets. You've often heard calls for poverty reduction programs, and we know that between 2007 and 2011, there was a measured decrease in household food insecurity rates in Newfoundland from 15.7% to 10.6%. So that's quite a substantial decrease, and it occurred when a comprehensive poverty reduction measure was introduced in that province. Next slide, please. So there are unique challenges that are faced by people living in food insecure households in Indigenous communities. Sorry, I just need to check my notes here. So the implementation of a federally supported strategy to comprehensively address the additional and unique challenges related to household food insecurity among Indigenous peoples are critically important. What you have here is a picture of my buddy Suzanne, and Suzanne is out picking berries with her child, Talon, and her mom. And this really, I love this picture because first off, it shows people harvesting food. But secondly, it underscores many of the issues that are faced by Indigenous peoples. So we need a commitment to reconciliation as recommended by the Truth and Reconciliation Commission and the United Nations Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples. So we need assurance of household food security and food sovereignty. We also need a fair resolution of dispute over access to land, because as is pointed out in this picture, people need access to land to ensure food sovereignty and access to traditional foods, because we know that people living in Indigenous households have very high rates of food insecurity. The Food, Nutrition, and the Environment Study, the First Nations Food, Nutrition, and Environment Study in 2008 showed 43% of Aboriginal households were living with food insecurity. We also need to provide sufficient supports to remove barriers for Indigenous peoples who are hunting, fishing, and gathering traditional foods. And lastly, we need to have improved access and ability to, improved access to and the ability to afford healthy store-bought or market foods, because many people live on First Nation reserves in northern and remote communities where food prices are substantially higher. And so, next slide, please. Here's what we would urge you to do. So to learn more about individual and household food insecurity, you can go to the Dietitians of Canada website, and the link is provided there. And plus, in just a couple minutes, I'll go through how to download all of these papers. And Melanie provided you with the Provincial Health Services Authority Food Costing in BC report. Melanie also mentioned the Welfare Food Challenge, and I'd certainly like to iterate that. I myself also did this, and I did it way back when, in 2012, and when the cost of housing hadn't interfered quite as much with the cost of food. And it is an extreme challenge, and like Melanie, I found myself short on food guide servings as well as short on a variety of micronutrients. You can learn more about BC's poverty reduction at the Poverty Reduction Coalition and also at Food Secure Canada. And so I've provided the websites to those. Next slide, please. The next link, this assess if your clients may be living in poverty by asking them, do you ever have difficulty making ends meet at the end of the month? You can see that as both a sensitive and a specific question that will get you an answer to whether or not people are living at the poverty line. This link will take you to the Doctors of BC resource on helping ameliorate the effects of poverty amongst your clients. It's an excellent resource, and this link takes you directly to the PDF for that resource. Those of you who are working in health associations may be interested in endorsing the DC position statement on individual and household food insecurity. And also available at the DC website is Dietitians of Canada's submission to the BC Minister of Social Development and Social Innovation. And the slide on income that I showed you is taken from that paper. And of course, last but not least, is speak to politicians, contact them, and advocate for the recommendations that I've outlined. Next slide, please. So, how to find the Dietitian of Canada papers. We have very extensive papers. I went through them. Next slide, please. One starts by going to the Dietitian of Canada website and click on Dietitian's Views. Next slide, please. When you click on Dietitian's Views, you'll get this drop-down list, and you can see food insecurity is right there. If you click on the household food insecurity, next slide, please, you will get to this page. And this is the title page for the household food insecurity. Next slide, please. And if you scroll down on that page, you'll find the position, including the information, the background paper, the position statement, the executive summary, and the handout that I showed you on food insecurity and handout. And you can download all of those at the Dietitians of Canada website. And next slide, please. This is a quote from the Right to Food and Food Security for Indigenous Peoples, which was shared by my friend Suzanne with me, and I think it says everything that we need to say. That poverty is a lack of self-determination. Success is having the knowledge and skills for survival. The wealthiest among us are those who give the most and only take what they need. And so that completes my part of the presentation, and I'd be happy to take questions at this time.
Well, thank you very much, Jerry. That's certainly excellent and certainly ties in with what Melanie said, and it sounds like the analysis that the Dietitians of Canada has done really ties into income security, as we've been talking about. Certainly BCHLA's position has been that income assistance rates should relate to the real cost of a healthy diet and to market rental rates. I think we're going to move on now because we're running a little short of time, and you'd mentioned some of the issues related to First Nations, and we have a very special speaker to talk more about that, and Jamie Kumar, so I'm very happy to introduce him. He has a tremendous amount of experience in this area, both internationally and locally. He's the owner and operator of AgriFirst Canada, a consulting firm specializing in First Nations agricultural development. He's going to tell us about the First Nations Food Systems Program, a province-wide project that he currently manages. So welcome, Jamie, and please go ahead.
Thanks, Mary, and good morning, everybody, and thanks for taking the time to be here. And I listened very carefully to both Jerry and Melanie's presentation, and that somehow makes me feel that what I'm doing here does make sense, because Jerry's and Melanie's presentation kind of makes the basis, and this project which we are running in a small way is attempting to to hit on the nail properly and make the difference. Anyway, so just before we go on to the, I see you all have the slides on your screen. This little angel which you see here is my favorite little one from Klaskas First Nation. She works every day with her grandmother in the community garden there, and she's a joy. Anyway, so a little background on this project, which is currently being funded by First Nations Health Authority and administered by the Heart and Stroke Foundation. And I have been contracted by the Heart and Stroke Foundation to manage this province-wide project at the moment. Prior to now where we are, this project started almost 10 years ago. Well, this concept started almost 10 years ago when I used to be with the BC Ministry of Agriculture as the First Nations Agribusiness Development Specialist. That is when we started this whole backyard gardens and community gardens initiative in the First Nations with ACNO funding. And we were able to introduce small-scale gardening programs in about 40 communities at that time. And also, in addition to starting the community gardens, we encouraged the establishment of community kitchens and food preservation, things like that. And at the end of the 2-year project, we did receive the Premier's Award for Innovation Excellence for that project. That was a good thing, good pat on the back. And then we moved on to from there. The Public Health Agency did fund a program through Ministry of Health called Produce Availability Initiative for the remote communities. And in that we had a section of that for the First Nations, and I actually managed that part of the First Nations program. And from PAI, we came into this program, which is First Nations Food Systems, which is currently being managed by the First Nations Health Authority. Right now, I have about 30 communities participating in this program. Next slide, please. Anyway, this shows why we need FNFS. FNFS is First Nations Food Systems Program. Could you go down and bring down all the bullets on that thing? Because in the interest of time, I'll just summarize rather than going through one each other. But before we go into this list here, I'll take 30 minutes to go to quote Chief Sam Moody from Newark, from where this whole program started 10 years ago. And it is a very good basis for the discussion. Sam Moody, in one of the public meetings, he said, "Today, we consume very little of our traditional foods and consume processed foods, junk food that contributes to our critical health. Moreover, our dependence on the hospital to fix our health problem increases our dependence on pharmaceutical solutions that further weakens many of our community members. Many of us have family members who struggle daily with conditions such as diabetes, heart failure, and cancer. Some of us have lost family members long before the age of maturity, causing us to become painfully aware of our weakened health conditions. We therefore seek to establish a foundation in our agricultural initiative that will provide preventative measures and help to build a healthy community." These are the words of the Sam Moody, the Chief of Newark Nation, where this whole program actually started. And the list which you see is the reason, I believe, which gives the support which I'm trying to do, right? There's very little consumption of the traditional foods in the community. And not just the consumption, it is the way the food was consumed in the traditional way, family get-togetherness and eating together, not just sitting in front of the TV and taking things out of the microwave and eating. The way we are eating and what we are eating right now has an impact on the health, and which has really is being driven by the interests of the industrialized food systems in the world all over, which are driving and making us believe that that is the only way to eat food. Is the reason for the health problems which we are having here, which is increased diabetes, heart failures, and things, right? And while we are eating that kind of food and gradually deteriorating our health systems, and we depend on these medical solutions. Medical solutions are further exacerbating the immunity conditions, and we are becoming much more weaker and getting more sicker. And we go back to the doctor, and they give us a little bit higher, bigger dosage of the same medicines, right? So it's a vicious circle which we are caught in. And one of the meetings when I was asked to speak at the Coastal Communities Health Authority, and I mentioned the problem of health is not within the health sector, it is outside the health sector, that is food sector. And that is where we have to attempt. And this project is trying to make that attempt and make the change in the First Nations. Next slide, please. Okay, by having the community food systems project, but there are several benefits which we are about to gain, and some of the First Nations are already in it. There are social benefits which brings people together, the belongingness, and then when in some of the communities where they have this community food systems project running well, the community gardens and the backyard gardens, that sense of pride, and they show off the produce which had been produced locally in their own backyards and in the community gardens, and they feel good. And the togetherness and bringing the communities together, for like the community garden is an excuse for the people to come together. We had like garden lunches and garden picnics, and people get into the gardens and start doing weeding and cleaning up and fixing the fences and things like that. The social benefit, the fabric of the community getting together and becoming tighter, we have seen that. That has been the social benefit of this project. Next one, please. And of course, we have health benefits. We talked about it already, and Jerry and Melanie, they very well explained as to what the situation is. That here, I have to mention a little bit. All the scenario which we have heard so far about the food insecurity, which is mainly for the general population, but when you look at it in the context of First Nations, their reality, their location, their income levels, and the skill levels and the management systems which they have, those problems are actually more than double or even triple in a way when we go and see the situation within the First Nations. So this project, which is trying to make a little difference, is definitely making a difference in social, and it is providing the health benefits, and we are seeing people accessing healthier food, which is locally grown, free of chemicals and things like that, right? And there is no more chemical additives in the food, and there is increased physical activity, people getting out and walking to the community gardens and working in the community gardens. All of that is having a beneficial impact on the health using community gardens. Next one, please. Of course, the environmental benefits. So we are reducing the garbage which we bring into the communities by means of food packaging and things, and we are reducing the pollution because of the lesser food transportation, and we are improving the landscape and the diversity of the communities by including gardens and cleaning up the place, and also avoiding any of the chemical risks which come with the commercial chemicalized to food production. So those are the environmental and social and benefits which the project is bringing in. Next, please. Okay, the objectives of the project. Let me give you a very broad out. The situations which the two papers which have been, well, the two presenters which talked about, and then what Sam Moody said, right? And the solution to that kind of a problem we see is first, is to create that awareness of the importance of local, fresh food, and it has to be accessible to the communities in an affordable manner, right? So that is the initiative of first objective of this project. And to assist the community, next thing what we do is to help the communities while we introduce the community gardens concept and the backyard gardens concept, to make it a long-term sustainable program of local food production and dependence on local fresh food. What we are doing is helping the communities prepare their community food security plans. Food security plans, it kind of puts the complete picture, not just the gardens, but the entire food source, like hunting, gathering, fishing, traditional methods of food preservation, smoking the fish, and all of that gets into a community food security plan, which is geared towards, which also gives the costing involved in making that thing, the plan into reality. And then we further go into another step. We kind of work with the chief and council, the administration, and the policymakers at the community level to buy into this program. But once the community food security plan is done, it gets into an organizational structure to ensure that the program would be supported by the highest authority in the community. So that is the main, had been a beneficial impact of community food plan. It is not just plan, but making sure that the plan will be implemented. We have done that thing, and we have right now about 6 community plans completed for this year in that way. And after we do the community food plans, we are encouraging the communities to ensure that there is flow of income to keep such kind of local production programs in place, because the communities, First Nations especially, cannot depend on grants forever and ever. They need to find a way to finance these programs themselves. And we have been introducing this concept of moving the community gardens into a market-oriented production systems, and which have, quite a few have done already quite successfully. And from a small-scale marketing systems, some of the First Nations are moving into a large-scale commercial production, shipping things out of Hazelton down to Burnaby, and those things are happening too. So it is the gradual step. First, enhance the utilization of fresh food, make it a way of living in the communities, and turn the community into food security, food secure, and then help them into economical development, utilizing agriculture to bring in the dollars to keep the food security program running. So those are the objectives of the project. Next slide, please. Okay, what do we do in this project? There are a few things right now we're doing. Every community which is participating in this project gets a $5,000 cash grant, which the communities can utilize in buying seeds, soil, fencing material, or they can utilize even to pay the garden coordinators up. Communities, we go into the community utilizing the local leadership. We create engagement, community engagement and training programs, bringing the people together at the planning stage itself so that they take ownership. And while the program, the gardens are being planted and running, we conducted workshops and trainings in basic, simple methods of food production, food processing, food preservation, right? And we are helping the community food plans, as I already mentioned, and to include the food plan into the organizational structure of these communities. Those are the strategies which we are utilizing through this program. Next slide, please. Those are the 30 communities which we have currently going on, and I may add here a little bit. Because of the success of this program, we have been getting quite a few requests as to why the other First Nations could not be included. So the funding authority, First Nations Health Authority, they put out an expression of interest about 3 months ago, trying to see if there is interest, how much interest is there in the communities. And I am flooded right now. We have 42 other new communities who want to join this program. So First Nations Health Authority is looking at the possibility of expanding this program from 30, which is right now, to about 75 communities next year. And just yesterday we were having a meeting. Looks like it might go through. So instead of 30 communities, as of February 2017, I would be working with 75 communities. Next slide, please. This is the existing management system which we have. We have project steering committee, which comprises the First Nations Health Authority, the Ministry of Agriculture, the Heart and Stroke Foundation, and a couple of members of the community, First Nation communities themselves. They form the project steering committee, which is kind of board of directors for this program, right? And then the First Nation program chief in Heart and Stroke Foundation, Jeff Summers, he is the project administrator, and I report to Jeff in Heart and Stroke Foundation. And with me, I have 3 what we call field coordinators. One in the northern interior, based in the Smithers area. There is another lady, Donna Gilpin, based in Williams Lake, and I have Diana, who is based on the Vancouver Island near Alert Bay. And those are the people who interface on a daily basis with the participating communities. And then each community which is participating appoints a garden coordinators. Either they are paid by this project or paid by the band itself, and they are the ones who look at the individual community food plan, individual community gardens, and we interrelate with them. So that is how the organized structure is currently working. Next one, please. Well, the project field activities which we are doing and going to be doing next year is the same thing what I already explained. Continuation or establishment of new community gardens, community meetings, workshop training sessions. And we also have, I did not mention earlier, we have about 6 regional gatherings a year where the communities are brought together for inter-community information exchange. And just this month, last week I did one in Duncan, the week before was in Williams Lake, and the week before that was in Hazelton. We had communities coming together and talking about what went right within the communities, what did not go right, and what they would like to see happening for the next year. That kind of community information exchange we do. And of course the community visits, I go and visit as many communities as possible and talk to the higher level people who make the decisions, and also conduct programs and workshops. And the field staff also does this community visits. We try to make at least 3 to 4 visits a year to each participating community. Right? So those are the activities which are right now going on. Next slide, please. Well, before we go into the community gardens pictures here, right? I must then say that I have all the 30 communities have already done the community gardens, and in a very successful way. And just to quote a few little bit things as to, because I got this report for this year just now, we had all the 30 communities doing community gardens, and we have approximately 120 individuals within these 30 communities got directly involved with the community gardens in either planting or helping prepare the garden soils and harvesting and distributing it. And we have produced approximately 250,000 pounds of fresh vegetables and root crops during this year, right? And we also had 20 First Nation community engagement meetings, and about 140 community members who got involved in those meetings. And I mentioned we did the 6 food knowledge exchange gatherings, and we have 6 community food plans in place. So that has been the impact for this year on First Nations for this year so far. Okay, so let's look at the pictures, please. Next one. This is a kind of a typical small community garden. This picture is from Ashcroft, and they built the frame for the greenhouse, and that will be covered this early next year. Next one. The same Ashcroft First Nation, they're growing potatoes right there. Yeah. Next. So melons, I think that was in Hockley First Nation. Go ahead. Next one. This is corn growing in, yeah, that's in Hockley. Go ahead, please. Next one. These are tomatoes in Shwe First Nation near Chilliwack. Next one. This is Shwe First Nation. That is my good friend, Sipri, looking after his corn, and that is the potato which they dig out of the community garden in Shwe. And that is how this is in Hockley. They grow their own seedlings in the greenhouse and then replant them in the community gardens. Next. That is the Hockley greenhouse. Next. The same kind of seedlings being grown there. Next. This is a greenhouse in Honeygueton, which is in Nehemiah Valley, which is way interior in Chilcotin. Next. It's same Nehemiah Valley, Honeygueton greenhouse. Next. This is a open production in Hockley. Yeah, potatoes growing there. This is family got involved. That is the family plot in the community garden that is on the island of Tofino in Hausath. With the same family, they are involved in the community gardens, and they also manage the coordinators. And the school, we try to involve the schools in that. This in Hausath, the school kids are involved in the community gardens there in Hausath band. Next. This is a community garden greenhouse in Klaskas, which is way interior in the Chilcote from Quesnel area. They produce the vegetables and fruits and also flowers in the top, which you have seen there. And this is also the Klaskas tomatoes. Next. Some lettuce being grown somewhere on the island here. This is in Hesquiat. Yeah, go ahead. That is the Hesquiat, not Hesquiat, Opisat near Tofino. They have their quite a beautiful looking greenhouse, and they produce those fresh produce there. Next. That's in Hesquiat, another little island off Tofino. That's a backyard garden in Opisat. There's a little kitchen getting involved in the garden in Las Galsap in the central interior in the north. Yeah. Next. These are kids, school kids planting their own seeds. This guy is planting lettuce, and there's another girl in the behind planting lettuce too. So they manage their own garden. This is the Klaskas community garden. The grandma and the two grandkids are daily workers in the garden. This is in Hausath again. Next. This is a gentleman who used to be a fisherman, and because of his health conditions, cancer and things like that in Kitkatla, he had quit his fishing business and got into gardening program. And he claims that the gardening program and the eating the fresh food is curing his cancer. Now he is the preacher in the community, and he preaches gardening. And this is another view of the Klaskas community garden. Next. This is Hesquiat. It's way out in remote, and the only way to get there is by float plane and then through boat. And this is up in the north in the Sekadini. Yeah, go ahead. This is New Ayansh community garden. Anyway, so what went right, as I explained, I gave you a little statistics, the number of people who got involved, the amount of produce which we produce, and it was distributed within the community to elders and schools, and individual communities got food baskets. That's how the food was distributed among the communities. And these are the things we did go right in the project. The commitment, we did have excellent support from the band administration, the chief and the council, the band contact person, and the field staff have been dedicated, hardworking people. And much of the program runs on the shoulder of what I call the community champions. They are the ones who make the things happen. Like one person there in the community takes on this thing and is working hard, and I'm so much thankful for them there. That relationship had worked very well, and there had been good accountability and financial management by the band administrations, most of them, I must say. And overall relationship with the funding agency, the project staff, and the Heart and Stroke Foundation, and we also have an external independent evaluation team, another consulting firm. So the working relationship had been perfect. So those are things which went right. And the things which did not go right, which are the challenges. So we have problems in late starting, hiring of community garden coordinators, and even though sometimes the funds are allocated and the checks go to the band, and the band has a system where the money goes into what I call one big pot, and they cannot find the money again, and those kind of logistics problems have delayed the program a little bit in some of the communities. And some of the band's internal policies do not help us with quick implementation of the program, and there's personality conflicts also we face through. That's a part of the working with First Nations all the time. And the other thing we notice is the programs are set up, and we get full support from the band manager and the economic development officer, and all of a sudden band manager leaves the program, and we are back to square one to find someone who could really give us the support. That kind of problems are there with this project, right? And at times the communication with the contact person becomes an issue because of the remote communities and where they are located and things like that. And to get to these communities to visit and conduct the programs of our workshops and things also becomes an issue with weather, and like if the snow we had yesterday, we couldn't have gone any place. So that kind of conditions are the challenges. So those are the challenges, and in spite of these challenges, we believe that we did make a dent, and if we didn't make a dent and make the improvement, we wouldn't have these 45 other communities who want to jump on board. So things are going well. The next, I think, is the last one. Next challenge. Okay, so that is where, if you all want to get in contact with me, just Summers of Heart and Stroke, to get more information, you can reach me anytime on my telephone, 778-229-9997, or email me at jammi, Jammi, at agrifirst.ca. So that is my presentation, and thanks for getting with me.
Yeah. Thank you very much, Jamie. You're certainly doing some great work with your project, and it's something that BCHLA certainly supports. We want to be sure that there's healthy foods that are available and affordable in all communities, and particularly, of course, remote communities. We have a couple of questions here for you, and actually several of them relate to the same thing, which talk about, like, for example, food security and food land sovereignty are so tied together, and why the focus on community gardens rather than country or traditional foods. And several people have sort of asked similar kinds of questions to that.
Yeah, I believe, because it needs to be done. It is not just small communities, and I'm seeing the similar kind of health problems related to food insecurity in small rural towns, small towns like in Burns Lake and Chetwynd, and I go there. It's a similar situation. What I notice in the reserves, I'm noticing it in small towns. And if this kind of program can be created and funded and supported by policymakers and government, yeah, we can make a difference. Yeah.
Yeah. Now, as you know, our speakers today, we particularly ask them because they've all got such knowledge and expertise in this area. We're going to open the floor now for questions for Melanie, Jerry, and Jamie. So we have a few here, and hopefully you're back online. Certainly, Liz has asked if change in food security comes from income support policy changes, what activities or actions can local communities do to influence policy change? And perhaps, Melanie, that might be to you.
Sure, I can start, and Jerry can follow up. So, I mean, this is a question that we often ask because it's like, what can happen at local community levels? And I think this is an area that we're exploring more. And I think, you know, within the local communities, Jerry put up some ideas of, you know, talking to your local MLA or MP around certain policies that you think are important, and that would change that is a really good way of connecting to that higher level policy change. Also, I mean, one thing that I don't know that we do as much in BC, and it's not my area of expertise, but I know that they do more so in Ontario, is trying to connect with some of the people who you do think have also have a voice in policy change. So looking to your municipal governments, to your medical health officers, people who maybe have a voice and are connected to higher levels, and doing some of that advocacy work in your community and working collaboratively, I would say is some of the ways to get at that broader policy intervention. And of course, if there's surveillance available, Jerry was talking about the initiative of the Docs of BC asking about poverty and starting to keep some local stats that we can't get from more provincial and national survey data, looking at who in your community do need those supports and what is it, and keeping some of those options open. And if there's opportunities for research, you know, looking at how policy interventions may change outcomes. So if there's a new housing development, does that change things in your community? But partnering with researchers around that. So that's where I'll just leave it there and see if Jerry has anything to add to that question.
Yeah, just
Jerry, would you like to add anything?
Yeah, just iterate what Melanie said, particularly when it comes to things like collaboration on housing, but anything that municipalities and regional districts can do to ameliorate income. So that might be things like finding spaces for daycare and subsidizing daycare, because that will put more money in people's pockets. Same thing for things like access to transit. Although, again, that's going to be a collaborative initiative. Many municipalities are working on their own parks and rec, so anything that you can do to decrease costs to people living on low incomes. So that will, again, put more income into people's pockets. So anything that communities can do that will result in people having more income in their pockets.
Great, thank you. And I would just like to add that that's something that BCHLA continues to advocate for. Our recent paper called Making BC Healthier for Kids, it's on our website. We sort of take all of our policy positions and put them within that framework, but we certainly continue to advocate for better income and food support, all of the issues we've been talking about today that are so important. Another question for you, Jerry, that Aaron has asked, does your report suggest a causal relationship between the incidence of all the listed health issues that you mentioned and food access? He was wondering about back problems.
Right. So all of the reported incidences would be associations, and so we cannot determine causation from those. For some of them, it's quite possible because, for example, a lot of people are maximizing their purchasing power by buying high-calorie, low-nutrition foods, which are pervasively available, and the cheapest calories in the marketplace. So that contributes to things like back problems because people aren't getting the healthy nutrition that they need, and so they and so it really always comes back to their associative relationships, not necessarily causative.
Right. Yeah. And again, I think this might be to Melanie. Hi there. I was surprised there were so many people not food insecure who were on income assistance. Is there any information we know about this group? 25% seems like a lot to not be food insecure based on current rates.
We didn't do an in-depth analysis on those people. To me, 25% is only a quarter of them. And I think it does vary depending on the size of family. So Jerry put up a slide, and Dietitians of Canada has looked into it a little bit to look at, depending on the family size, the amount that they get, the subsidies that they get. So if somebody, for example, I'm just postulating here, but as a family of 4, they get more money than, say, a smaller family, and it does get cheaper to buy more food and in bulk amounts for larger families, say a family of 4 or 5. And also, if some of those people have, not everybody on social assistance is signed up for all of the benefits and have done their income taxes. So I think it varies around the number of benefits they're getting. Also, if they're maybe possibly in a social housing situation or somewhere where rents are quite a bit lower across the province. So I think there's a number of different factors that might affect why, a quarter of those people on social assistance are not food insecure. So Jerry, I'm not sure if BC, I did work on that paper too, but I'm not sure if there was more information on that.
No, there's the only thing that I'd add would be the suggestion that social assistance rates be indexed to the age of children, because as I'm sure most people know, that a 1-year-old eats a lot differently than a 16-year-old. The other thing I was going to say is that in the food cost in British Columbia report, you can find the index to prorating food costs to the size of family. So you can see that it does tend to be much more expensive for single people and than our base family of 4, and then food costs actually decrease as you go higher in numbers in a family. So that information is in the Food Costing of BC report.
Thanks, Jerry.
And Jerry, another question for you, and you said thanks for your excellent presentation, but what would you say to a local community health network who wants to address child food insecurity? Advocating for national provincial income policy seems out of the reach for a small grassroots network, and there's a desire to do something tangible in the community. Would initiatives that help reduce food costs, e.g. school meals, snack programs, be aligned with the evidence?
So there I'm consistently fall back on just sort of my personal position is that we need to do both, and that I don't think you should underestimate the voices of small groups raised in advocacy, but that we need to continue to contribute to food banks, and we need to we need to continue to work on community gardens and community kitchens, because that puts food in bellies. And given our current situation around food insecurity, that's what, it's problematic. We have people who are either worried about food or actually don't have enough food. So we need to continue our programs, and we need to add in our advocacy, because it's only through our advocacy that we will achieve the policy outcomes that will truly ameliorate food insecurity on a long-term basis.
Right. Now, several people have asked about other organizations that are involved in advocating for improved income security. I think what we'll do with that is that we will send something out in an email, because there are a number of organizations, including, of course, BCHLA, who are involved in this, and I think that might be the easiest way of doing it. Because there are a couple of other interesting questions here, and one from Rafika. I would like to know, please, if new immigrants have a share in these food security plans, as I know that food security is high among them. I heard in the news lately that many of the new Syrian families will eventually be put on social welfare if they fail to find jobs, which adds to the food insecurity problem in the country. Have any of you, Jerry or Melanie, looked at that issue?
I think we start to enter into complex gradations of food insecurity, and where you get into issues of acceptable food, because it's certainly challenging. I know here in Squamish it's challenging to find halal food. And so if people are dependent on food banks, then they may not be able to access food that is acceptable to them, which results in food insecurity. So that would be one of the key things. And so yes, absolutely. And again, there's data in the background paper about the levels of food security in immigrant families.
Right. Yeah.
As there is in our paper as well, and I think that early immigration and refugee, I think, if I'm not mistaken, there's higher rates, and then as immigrants, get into community and live in the province longer, I think that the rates do decrease. But I think with all, populations, food insecurity is there, and it exists within segments of all populations.
Right. And I think Jamie, Joey is asking, are there first-hand stories available from communities that are part of the First Nations Food Systems Program?
Yes, we do have several stories. In fact, the last year of the evaluation program, we actually did a kind of a videos of individual communities who explained their story, how they were able to do that. It is available, and if anybody wants to send me email, I will provide them the links.
Okay, that's great, because again, the slides and everything will be available on our website, so people will be able to follow up if they haven't taken a note of those addresses. So I want to just do a couple of quick ones here. I understand that the problem of food insecurity is reduced when people turn 65. Any comments on this, or is that true?
Yeah, there's a
yes,
lot of
it is.
Oh.
You go first, Mel.
I'll start. There's actually a couple of very recent. Lynn McIntyre and her team just released a report from that, and Dr. Val Tarasek, who we worked with that closely, and they look at 65 and over as more that guaranteed annual income kind of example. That's when people are eligible for government support, and so they do see that there is a fairly big decrease in the numbers of food insecure households when people turn 65 and get those income supports from government. And I think there's at least 2, if not 3, journal articles from Canada on that specifically. And also the proof policy paper does talk about that example specifically.
As does the backgrounder.
Yeah. And Barbara is asking the relationship between health issues that both Melanie and Jerry talked about and food insecurity association, or is it causal, meaning that people with back problems might have more food insecurity and not necessarily that food insecurity causes back problems, heart disease. Do you want to comment on that?
So again, I think what we're dealing here is the question of causation, which we cannot address. We only have associations, so we cannot develop a causal direction between that association and the outcome. But there are things that make us think and deserve further investigation.
Yeah. And how would you comment on the trend towards local food production, but the related high pricing for local produced food? Example, farmers markets have high food pricing. Anybody wants to comment on that?
Yes, can I take it on, please? This is a notion that the local food is more expensive than the food which we get by walking in the aisles of Save-On Foods. Yes, the farmers market food, the tomato might cost $1.50 when the Save-On Foods tomato might cost $1. But the Save-On Foods is being subsidized by a system. For example, the garbage which the Save-On Foods and the food packaging which goes into the landfill, and we are paying to take care of the landfill. And if we take out to calculate the money which we are spending on managing that waste and add it onto the tomato, it is actually more expensive than what the money we pay for the tomato at the farmers market. So the multinational corporations try to make us feel that their food is cheaper, but which is not so. They are, and we are subsidizing them in many ways from the back, and then they're trying to comparing. So it is not right to compare oranges to apples right there. And the situation, what I just want to add something more. Even though we struggle in this scenario, trying to improve the household income so that they have better access to food, it is still not going to meet to solve the real problems. It is not just the access to food. The quality of the food which is being dumped in our yards is the issue. These days, the food which is being produced is not being produced for its nutrition content. It is being produced to make it look good, to withstand the long transportation corridors, right? So that is what it is. And if we can do the nutritional analysis of tomato, which is taken out of the shelf on Superstore, and compare it with the organic produce in the community garden, the nutritional content of these two would be highly different. So it is not just the access to food, it is access to quality food, which is chemical-free. And that is where the rural municipalities with whom I am working with, and I talk to them all the time, should come up with this program of encouraging local consumption of local food, right? So it has to be a policy intervention right at the top level, not just looking at the health, but also looking at connections between the health, food, and the economics of the community, and then we can move forward. Thanks for that.
Great.
2 minutes.
Thank you so much, Jamie. I'm afraid we're going to have to close off now. We've come to the end of our time for the webinar, and so I'd like to thank our panelists, Melanie, Jerry, and Jamie. Thank you for sharing your research and knowledge with us today, as well as for the work that you do on an ongoing basis. I know there were a number of questions we didn't get to, and we'll try to follow up with those who asked the questions and provide you some more information as well. And as we've mentioned before, this webinar will be on our website, so you can go back and go through it as well. So I'd like to thank all of you who joined us, the audience today, for your questions and your attention. It's been very exciting. We're going to be following up with a short survey, and I hope that you'll respond, as the results help us learn from these events and what's working and what we can do better next time. And of course, we'll be continuing with our webinar series, so watch your inbox in January for our next webinar. We hope that you will join us again, and in the meantime, we wish you very happy and healthy and safe holiday season, and enjoy the rest of the day. Thank you so much.